Hello and welcome to the Cyberwork with Infosec podcast. For 12 days in November, Cyberwork is premiering a new episode every single day. In these dozen episodes, we'll discuss hiring best practices, career strategies, team development, and in today's episode, you'll learn about changing the culture of security awareness. Back on October 5th, Cyberwork introduced you to Bruce Hallas, author, speaker, and host of the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast, to talk about his security awareness journey and his strategies. In today's episode, taken from Infosec's Inspire virtual conference, Bruce joins host Kristin Zurovich to speak about the ways that companies can move their security awareness strategies from a have-to mindset, as in, I have to remember to do this because IT will yell at me if I don't, to a want-to mindset, in which security becomes not just a check mark on a to-do list, but something that everyone in your company takes personal ownership of, even after the security training modules have been finished. We hope you enjoy this 30-minute conversation between Bruce and Kristin. If you want to learn cybersecurity or move up the ladder in your career, we're giving all Cyberwork listeners a free month of access to hundreds of courses and hands-on cyber ranges with Infosec Skills. Infosec Skills is aligned to the work roles, knowledge, and skill statements in the NICE workforce framework and can help you at any stage in your career. Be sure to use the code CYBERWORK when signing up. More details can be found in the episode description below. Catch new episodes of Cyberwork every Monday, 1 p.m. Central Time on our YouTube channel or on audio whenever you like to get your podcasts. And now, let's start the show.
So let's kick things off. I think maybe a good way would be to talk a little bit about the security journey that brought you to where you are today, and a little bit about what prompted you to kick off the research you did about rethinking the human factor.
Okay, so very briefly, I joined the industry. I came in from quite a different route to the majority of people. So I actually originally trained in law, finance, and marketing. And after about 10 years, I came across an opportunity which led to me joining the industry. And I've been here for over 20 years now. So I'd like to think I'm getting something right. Or maybe just people have too thick skins. Anyway, so I think the early lesson actually for me, the thing that really helped me working with both my own board of directors at the time, but also our clients, was that because of my legal training and because of my marketing training and because of my finance training, I was able to have conversations with the finance director, the marketing director, and the company lawyer advocate, and relate to them why information security was something they should be interested in. And this was a really powerful tool to all the IT managers I was day-to-day speaking with, because it was a language that they hadn't been trained in. And so I would work with them to sort of, we would understand what it meant from an IT perspective, but I would help translate that into meaningful benefits to all those different stakeholders within the business, and that helped the business back. Majority of my work for the first 14 years was around governance, risk, and compliance. So I would help boards understand what the risk is to their key performance indicators, and the ones I was particularly focused on was cash flow and profitability. And we would then work with the board and all those different stakeholders, and they would say, we're happy with that, we're not happy with that. And that would then give the people I was at an operational level who were responsible for controls, that would give them something to move towards. And so they would design technical controls, and they would design policies, processes, and procedures. And it was interesting. That was the first point where I started to realize the importance of the human aspect really here, because we would write everything in policies. The board would say, this is our expectation, and we'd have an employee user policy or supplier policies, whatever. Some of them we could enforce technically, but actually a fair amount of it, we were really relying upon people to do as we asked them. And regularly, we would see that people wouldn't necessarily do as we asked them to do, which is very frustrating, because then the finance director of me was thinking, hold on, we've invested all this, in having our own teams and bringing in consultants, maybe outsourcing elements of security to various vendors. And yet we're still having this reoccurring problem. We haven't sorted the problem. It still exists. And as a finance trained person, I'm thinking, well, the return on investment on that's not particularly sharp. And then it was like, okay, so I started to realize, I started to question the value of what it is we do, and then to really focus my mind upon, for all the work I do in governance, risk, and compliance, it really comes down to whether or not people choose to behave in line with a policy. And that 7 years ago kicked me off on a research path, which I call the Rethinking the Human Factor, where I rethought pretty much every aspect of what I do when it comes to information security, including the bit that we call education and awareness.
Fantastic. And that's actually what drove our conversation for today. So I'm interested, basically the conclusion you've come to then is that to move from that have to culture to a want to culture really is based in influence, right? And I know through your research, you actually explored several different behavioral theories tied specifically to influence, things like choice architecture and nudge theory and so forth. But that when applying those kind of things to security, or more specifically to security education, you can actually significantly change behaviors or reduce risk. And I'd love if you could share a little bit about, first of all, what these theories are, and then secondly, a couple of examples of how these types of theories have been applied in other situations to really shift the behaviors and to influence the behaviors to be less of that, I have to do this versus I want to do this.
Okay. So, I think what we're talking about here, when you mentioned the phrase nudge theory and the behavioral economics, it is one part of what's come out of my research in terms of how we might want to set ourselves around behavior. And it's one, there are lots of different techniques. I think the underlying thing that came from my research is, we sort of assume that if we present people with information, that they'll process that information in a logical way, and that they'll come out of that, they'll come through that process, and they'll come to the same conclusions which drove us to actually write the policy in the first place, or write the training in the first place. And so that's based on the assumption that we're logical as humans. I think anecdotally, most of us know that in day-to-day life, we probably come across lots of examples where that's not particularly logical. People don't think, why do they do that? Now, it's interesting, about 30, 40 years ago, that social science, our understanding of how people, of humanity, how we make decisions, how we process information, how we receive information, actually, how we process it, how we make decisions, choices, put it that way, has completely changed. And so the thing that was really interesting in my research in the early days is that much of society, from government to private sector and to not-for-profits, has finally got to grips with its understanding that actually people often make decisions in certain circumstances without thinking. They don't cognitively think something through. Actually, a lot of it is subconscious or unconscious responses to stimuli. And this is as a result of how we've evolved as human beings. And it served us really well thousands of years ago when we were maybe on the savannah or we were hunter-gatherers types. It served us very, very well. But we've evolved, and society's evolved, and now we're making decisions using the same old tool, but having to make a lot more decisions a lot more quickly. And basically, part of how we've evolved is that the brain will say, look, I've got two sides to the brain. One side is for thinking, the other side is for just getting on with that. And the evidence is that we use this lizard side of our brain, the bit which is automatic. We use that a lot more than we like to think. We like to think that we're all pretty good at logic and reasoning. If you ask anybody, to rate themselves in terms of their driving ability, most people will rate themselves as above average, which you can't be above average. If everybody rates themselves above average, that doesn't work. Okay. So yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that comes across from my research was that, people are using this side of the brain a lot more than we would like to think, and they're using it for all manner of things and decisions, and that could be being applied to cybersecurity as well.
So talk to me a little bit about some examples where we've been able to shift that thinking from that side of the brain into something that is more in line with where we want people to go, perhaps with their decisions on a day-to-day basis.
One of the best examples that I've shared with people is around tax. So here in the UK, we have a department called HMRC, responsible for collecting tax. And traditionally, once a year, I think it's the same in the United States, there's a certain date in the year where you have to submit your tax return. And if you don't submit your tax return on time, there's usually a follow-up process of reminders, which usually in the form of letters, and the language gets stronger, shall we say, okay? And a lot of that language is about by law, you have to submit your information by this. If you don't, this is the potential penalty, okay? Not too dissimilar to information security policy. You've been trained on it. If you don't comply with it, here you go. Okay, there's a penalty for doing that. So in the UK, there was a member of the civil service who was given the responsibility to get as much of the unpaid tax back to the Treasury. And I think the figures were in the 600, 700 million pound mark. So it's a reasonable sum of money. And they've become aware of work which had sort of been done from an academic research perspective in the US with some Kaiman, for example, and Rich Tales. And they basically brought them over to the UK, got them to sit down with the Cabinet Office and explain this concept of behavioral science. And a couple of things that came out of it, but basically humans make decisions often using these pretty standard principles and rules. One of them is that we're incredibly influenced by something called social influence. So we're influenced by what we see going on around us. Okay, and what other people in our peer groups are doing at any one time. So a marketeer will tell you, for example, that somebody that buys BMW, for example, is probably got other friends or work colleagues that have BMWs. Same with Mercs and all the other brands of cars. But anyway, so on an understanding that people tend to be influenced by what other people do, this particular civil servant took the letters and actually changed just small parts of the letters to emphasize the behaviors of groups that the person receiving the letter might be associated with. And they did this in really simple ways. One was to use the postcode. So in the US, you have a zip code, and your zip code defines roughly, geographically, this is where you are, and this is your zip code. And in the UK, we have a postcode. So what they did is they actually said that X percentage of people have paid their tax on time in your postcode. Now, a lot of people go, what difference does that make? Well, it made a difference. It actually led to an increase in the number of people paying their tax on time. Then they did the same with letters around targeting, I think it was doctors, I think it was. There was an example where they sent a tax reminder reminding the doctors that actually other doctors have paid on time. Again, it led to an increase. And they did this over a couple of different examples of applying the same principle of social influence, but applying it to a number of different letters. And then on the fourth letter, what they did is they actually accumulated all the different things, put it all into one letter, and the increase in terms of actual payments back was really significant. It was, I think it was like 14 or 15%, if I remember rightly. Now, 14 to 15% doesn't seem like a lot to a lot of people, but 14 to 15% of 700 million is quite a reasonable return on making some changes to the words within your letter. And I think this is really, this isn't the only example. When I found this, I started to find lots more examples of this going on everywhere, and how people are using this insight to deliver better change results in terms of influencing behavior. And the likes of Facebook and LinkedIn use this as a core part of how they design their platform and their service. And getting people to interact with their platform is really important metric. Okay, and it's really important metric because it's a thing that investors will look at and go, well, are people interacting with the platform? Because if they're not interacting with the platform, then advertising-wise, we've got lower rates. And that's where generating revenue and profit. That's what it's really about at the end of the day, as far as the investors are concerned. So there's all this stuff going on, and I looked and went, oh, could we be using that when it comes to trying to influence behavior within the security context? And you know what? Yeah, I mean, I've got experience now having done the research, gone out and worked with organizations where we've applied it, and you can see difference. People who are maybe resistant in the past are more willing to engage because they're actually, what you're using behavioral insights, designing things with that in mind, increasing the chances that somebody will choose to engage with your content, for example.
Absolutely. And I love that because we're seeing that in a shift in some of our clients, for example, that are doing just that thing, where rather than, here's all this content and we're going to serve up, training modules or phishing simulations every single month, and we're going to track how many people click or don't click, and it's really all about the content, right? They're all looking at serving up as much content as they can and giving you as much information as they can, versus just that subtle change to, hey, did you know that within your department, 87% of the individuals in your department have completed their training already? Or have you seen that, the accounting department has completed all their training? Or the engineering department has completed all their training, but we're seeing that the sales department hasn't yet. So using that nudge theory to say, look what your peers are doing, do you want to be like your peers, is a very subtle yet effective way to kind of move that thought process from one side of the brain to the other, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that what really makes it interesting is the intervention, which is what it's all about, is low risk, low cost. If it doesn't produce the data you're expecting, then you can tick off and say it didn't produce. Now it's a known.
Exactly.
In security, we're constantly working with unknown type things, and we're like, okay, yeah, these are small interventions that you can make, low cost, low risk. If things don't quite work out going to plan, you're not going to find yourself with a major problem.
Exactly.
And I think if you sit down with the board and they say, okay, can you show us where this stuff's being applied? And I go, well, it's won 2 Nobel Prizes. Okay, and ask the question, say, do you think Facebook's successful? Do you think LinkedIn's successful? You can talk about these big brands and they'll probably say yes. And you go, okay, so their strategy is based around an understanding of how behaviors are formed and influenced. And how is that any different from any strategy, including that within information security?
Right. And I think back even to, security awareness or education in general. There are a lot of organizations that do their annual training program, and October tends to be a popular month for that, given that it's National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And they do a full-on blitz at that point, and a lot of really, really well done programs, I will say that. But then, it's kind of like we need to get this all completed at this time of the year. But then throughout the course of the year, it wanes a bit. And I think, even to your point of you're nudging people throughout the year, whether it's posters up in the break room or fun things, not the you have to do this by X and X date, but more of that almost friendly competition, or letting people know how others are successfully doing. I think those kind of concepts that you can continue to layer in, like you said, they're low cost, they're low risk. If one particular poster or event doesn't work out, try another one, right?
Yeah.
I'm interested.
And you're trying to get the buy. Sorry, trying to get the buy-in for doing that. It's really important, because I think you've just highlighted something I see a lot of, which is people get drawn into October or whenever their education and awareness month is, and there are arguments for that. But it's interesting with a lot of the work that I do. So I've looked into like how long we remember things for. So if you do it all in October, the likelihood is that you will forget most of what you did in October by December.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So, and it's just like a case of, so you, like you say, you need to keep the pressure up. And most people struggle with it. They say, well, I can't get more time. Like, you know, the board won't give me more time. The employees, I get maybe, if I'm lucky, 1 hour in a year. And this is the great thing about that whole application of nudges. You know, you can use nudge both in terms of how you do education and awareness and comms campaigns on an ongoing basis, but even how you design security day to day. And you can increase the chances that people will buy into it that way. And it's a really powerful tool which can be deployed throughout the whole year.
Yeah, the importance or the impact of repetition and reinforcement can't be understated.
Yeah,
you know, it's the same way, you know, we change our buying behaviors based on the repetition of ads that we see, things that we hear. It's that repetition and reinforcement, and then knowing that there are others in our peer group also using that type of solution or product or whatever.
And from a marketing perspective, we fully appreciate the fact that, you know, if I bought the product once and the experience was great, okay, I'm likely to buy it again. If I buy the product once, if you persuade me to buy the product, to buy into security, and the experience is a nightmare, okay, what's the likelihood that I'm going to want to engage with your content again and give you my time and make a choice which is in favor of what your values are more than mine? Right.
I'm interested.
That's really important. Really important.
My apologies for interrupting. I'm interested. I know we talked prior to this call about the ability for, I mean, you have your organizational culture, right? And then you have your security culture. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how security culture relates to the overall organizational culture, and how do you marry these two?
Well, some might say marriage is a very traditional institution. I think it's really interesting. I mean, I've just finished writing a couple of chapters for a book. And culture it's one of the hard areas. It's a very hard area to deal with. We talk about organizational culture, and then we talk about security culture. So I guess the thing that I push back to people to seriously think about is, why would you have one over the other? Why have security culture? You know, we do talk about the importance of security being everybody's responsibility. As soon as we create two, sort of in our minds or on an organizational sheet or anything, as soon as we create that, we're sort of like saying, you know, this is the organizational culture, this is the security culture. And you're like, some people can go, well, that's separate. And as soon as you separate it, people feel like that's not my responsibility, which is really important, that whole sense of responsibility. I guess the other thing about culture which really interests me is that organizational culture, organizational culture is, you know, the employees within an organization, the people, and the values that they associate with. But those values, a majority of those values, have already been embedded within them before they even started work. So actually, one of the things that came from my research, I suddenly got to realize that actually, depending on your definition of culture, and for me, I have a very specific definition of culture, it's all around values, then most of those values are actually developed, embedded when you're born. And through the early years of your life, you then go into a working environment and you take those values in with you. And you normally try to move towards organizations that share your values, like Google, for example. You know, and it's great for Google because they promise these values. It really pulls in some amazing people, totally amazing people. doing totally amazing things, okay, right? But then it hits a problem, because then people start to, within Google, start to go, yeah, your values aren't the same as mine in some circumstances. And we've seen that, in the US and in the UK and in Europe, we've seen Google employees leaving the offices, standing outside and saying, I'm not happy. So I think it's a really interesting thing when you're looking at security culture. One, do we really want to have a separate culture? Don't we want security to be just the organization, the way things get done in its organization? Two, organizational culture is actually generally based upon the values that everybody brings to an organization. So really, is what for me is organizational culture. I think it's like there's a crossroads there that goes on, and part of what security is about trying to find how it's going to act as a linchpin through all of that. And that means about understanding what are the values which are prevalent in your group. And the reason why this is really important is that when you go back to behavioral economics and understanding how behaviors are formed and influenced, I did an interview with a guy called Dan Ariely, one of the world's best known behavioral psychologists, and he was pointing out that actually values are a really big driver of decisions. And that's why you've got to look at culture, okay? But you've got to understand what the values are prevalent within your organization, and you've got to thread it through your strategy.
Sure. So less talking about a security culture, but actually talking about security as part of the organizational culture is what you're essentially saying.
Yeah, I mean, what does it deliver?
Yeah.
And this is what a good CISO should be doing. They should be having a conversation with the board, which is that this is how it contributes to the success, the resilience of our organization. And part of that is about reinforcing the values that the board has. If you're supporting them and their values, you're much more likely to get buy-in.
Absolutely. Good. We're running up on time. I knew our time together would go so quickly. I'm wondering if you could maybe recap for our viewers today, if there were maybe two things you'd like them to take away, or if they're just getting started, shifting their organization from this have to a want to mindset. What are two things, or what's one big thing that they should be thinking about? What's one thing you want them to take away from today?
I think the one thing which has completely thrown me on probably the most interesting journey I've had in terms of information security is I recognized that it was all around influencing behavior and culture. And I asked myself a serious question: what skills, experience, knowledge do I have around understanding what it means to be human, what it means to actually how behaviors are formed and influenced? And I don't mean just frameworks. I have my SABAC framework, but you actually understand the principles about how behaviors are formed and influenced. You can even make your own framework up. And so for me, that's really, really the big thing to take away for the whole of our industry. Is if we really want to influence behavior and culture, then what do we know enough about how behaviors and cultures are formed and influenced? Because if we don't, we're really making it difficult for ourselves.
So I guess that's maybe an action item, or something for all of our viewers to think about, is if you haven't thought about that side of how behaviors are made or how decisions are made. There's plenty of literature out there. There's plenty of resources out there that will help you start moving your program in that direction. So I think it's a great opportunity to start moving beyond just the compliance, I have to, or my employees have to the want to side. And like I said, there are a lot of resources available to do that. Bruce, if folks want to reach you or catch up with you after today, where can they reach out to you?
Right. Okay. Well, best way to do that, I mean, listen to the podcast, and we'll be series 4 is coming up. We've got some really interesting people on the podcast. We always mention how you can get in contact with us there. You can drop me an email at bruce.hallas@marmalade box. Another way, a shortcut, is pick up the book. It's a really thin book. It's designed to cost less than a Starbucks and your lunch.
Fantastic.
So that's a good way to start sort of engaging with the ideas that we have.
Thanks for checking out Rethinking the Human Factor with Bruce Hallas and Kristin Zurovich. Join us again tomorrow for our next episode, Security Awareness, Behavior, and Culture, Ask Us Anything, featuring today's guest, Bruce Hallas, as well as Jinan Budge, Principal Security and Risk Analyst at Forrester. Jinan and Bruce were featured in an open mic Q&A conversation at our Infosec Inspire conference and answered an array of questions from our virtual audience. Cyberwork with Infosec is produced weekly by Infosec. The show is for cybersecurity professionals and those who wish to enter the cybersecurity field. New episodes of Cyberwork are released every Monday on our YouTube channel and at all the places where you like to get podcasts. To claim 1 free month of our Infosec Skills platform, please visit infosecinstitute.com/skills and enter the promo code CYBERWORK for a free month of security courses, hands-on cyber ranges, skill assessments, and certification practice exams for you to try. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for more Cyberwork. Bye for now.